Welcome to the Leader Post Rider Rumblings podcast, episode 165. Taylor Shire and Darrell Davis are with you for another chat as we talk about the Riders' latest victory. They improved to 2-0 with a 28-23 win in Hamilton over the Tiger Cats on Saturday. And lots to discuss once again for another week about, I'm not going to call it up and down, but an interesting game in terms of how it all played out, Darrell.
Yeah, I love the way Corey Mesa, head coach, talked about it, Taylor, that it wasn't perfect. And they never want to be perfect, to be honest, because once you're perfect, you don't have to work on anything. And the Roughriders have lots to work on, but they've also done a lot of good things too, right? You and I were talking before we started recording about the calmness that has taken over the Roughriders, how experienced they look. And even when things are going bad, even when Brett Lothar misses a bunch of field goals or they take a rare penalty or they lose a challenge, there's no frustration on the team. And I think that's really a good sign for them. And to me, that's a big reason why they're 2-0 at this stage of the season.
Yeah, to me, you mentioned Lothar 2 for 5. I think a big thing, and a few guys talked about it after, is they pick each other up, right? Nobody's pointing fingers or blaming. And his misses didn't cost them the game, which obviously helps. People not point fingers and helps pick each other up. But for Brett, it was an interesting week because they practiced inside due to the smoke in Regina. So he didn't get a chance to kick a field goal in practice. He is working with a new holder in Joe Couch. I don't know how much that has to play into developing more chemistry. And Joe Couch, I mean, he had an okay game punting, but again, he didn't get to punt during practice at all either. I imagine those guys would kick in the stadium with a little bit of smoke after practice, before practice, just to get reps in. I think you need reps throughout the week. So, but the fact that they weren't able to run any actual kicks during practice maybe played into it. I don't want to make excuses for either guy, but that could have been a factor, right?
It does change the routine, right? And practice always helps. So missing that does make a difference. Is it forgivable? Well, they're professionals. They have to go out and kick somewhere. That's what they're paid to do. So Brett Lothar's pretty good at accepting that, and he's also pretty good at rebounding from it, as he did last year, right? Didn't he make 28 of his next 29 or something after struggling in that Montreal? It was a Montreal game, I believe, right? So, so he bounces back. When it comes down to it late in the season and they really need him, I'd say he's pretty dependable. Sometimes he has a little blip early in the season, but he gets over it. And a lot of that has to do with the player support that he gets, the coaching support. Are they going to bring anybody in? I can't imagine they're bringing somebody in to challenge him. They're just going to say, okay, that's Brett. We know he's going to bounce back, and he usually does. So having that confidence in him gives him confidence, and I think that'll make him better as the season goes along.
Yeah, that was his 100th game as a Rider, and I think you could count on one hand how many bad games he's actually had with this team. Probably it's less than 5 in my opinion. So until it becomes a trend, I don't think it's a cause for concern at this point.
Right. Yeah, true enough. And, if you really need a kicker, there's probably one around. They do have to phone and find somebody. That's what so many personnel guys over the years have told me. Kickers are only a phone call away. Like, do they have his experience or his ability? Probably not. But if you do eventually lose confidence in him, then you can pick up the phone and find somebody. You don't even have to wait for the draft. There's always some sort of kicker or punter floating around. It's unfortunate that that's the way we classify them, but they are in this sport, replaceable pieces.
Yeah. Okay. Elsewhere, I mean, that was sort of the one negative of the game, but there was plenty of good to talk about. AJ Ouellette, had a 47-yard touchdown run, 96-yard performance. I'm sure he would have loved to get over 100, but just for him to have that sort of bounce-back game after leaving last week's game with a concussion, I think speaks to what he was trying to bring to the table this week.
Yeah, they had 133 rushing yards, though, didn't they? Because they platooned a little bit. After losing Thomas Bertrand Hudon, sorry. Yep. I got the hyphens mixed up there, who played so well during the preseason and in relief of Ouellette for that first game, getting hurt. And they had brought in Kadeem Carey just in case AJ Ouellette was injured, and Carey was put on the roster. They've got enough Canadian talent that they can add an extra American running back, and they wanted to platoon him. I'm pretty sure they said, you know what, we have another weapon here. There's no sense just keeping him on the bench the entire game. So platooning a little bit helped the entire offense, I think. They're different type of running backs a little bit. They threw to both of them, to each of them a little bit, and changed. It's a bit of a change of pace. And it looked like it really helped AJ Ouellette, right? We talked about Ouellette playing pretty well in Toronto. when Andrew Harris was his backup, that when he gets a little, let's get to spell him a little bit. I know he's likes to be a physical specimen, and he is strong and in shape, but you know what? Some running backs, he's been around a bit too. So maybe it's good to platoon him a little bit. And you know what, Taylor, it might even be a little bit motivational knowing that Kadeem Carey is over his shoulder pushing him. Not that he needs pushing, but you just get that little bit extra focus because you know that there's somebody ready to step in and I don't want to give up that job. And that's what sports are all about.
Yeah, I would say that's a very big reason why they want two guys on there is because they each can take over that starting role at any time versus, I mean, Thomas Bertrand Hudon, good running back, but he was never going to be that starter ahead of AJ. But I would say they have now more of a competition in terms of if one guy has a big game, he might start getting more of the carries. And if they can make it work ratio-wise, I don't see why they wouldn't continue to roll with these two guys. Thomas Bertrand Hudon could still come back on the roster in some way, shape, or form because he's a good special teams player. He's valuable in that sense, but I think they should continue to roll with this two-headed monster, if you want to call it that. Yeah,
they could use a few extra players on offense. When their head, I get such a kick out of it. Their head coach is a defensive line guy. He's the defensive coordinator. They have 9 defensive linemen on the roster, right? And only 2 running backs. They only carry 1 extra offensive lineman. So, but they're sure chock full of defensive linemen. So it wouldn't hurt to have another guy. You put Tom. I don't think you're going to use your 2 American running backs on special teams, unless one of them is returning kickoffs or something. But Bertrand Hudon is a valuable piece, and have him on, let him play special teams as well. And you know that you've got a reliable backup. So yeah, adding a guy, I agree with you totally. Keeping Carey and Ouellette and a Canadian running back all at the same time is probably not a bad idea.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of other pieces on the offense, Keenan Schaefer-Baker heads to the injured list ahead of the game. Samuel Emmis got nicked up. He said he had Mace said he had a Charlie horse. Didn't appear too serious. But it kind of opened the door for Keyshawn Johnson, who we obviously knew what he could do last year. He was a starter all throughout last year, had a couple 100-yard games late in the season. But, man, for him to put that performance together, 124 yards and a touchdown, including that touchdown drive where he caught, 4 first downs consecutively before getting into the end zone. Yeah. For him to sort of step up in both of those guys' absence, I think, proved what Trevor Harris keeps saying is that any guy can have, a big night no matter what.
Yeah, and they moved him around, right? Johnson's usually a wide receiver, but without Schaefer-Baker, because Schaefer-Baker looks like he's going to be out for quite a while. He's on the 6-game injury list and good receiver missing out of the lineup. Move Johnson inside. That's where most of the receiving yards are tallied in the Canadian Football League. So he became a lot closer to the quarterback. He became a lot more involved, and he can handle it. It's not as easy going in there. You're taking some hits from linebackers and hard-hitting defensive backs, where if you're a wideout, you're usually just up against a corner. They don't hit as hard. They cover better, but they don't hit as hard. So Johnson seemed to absorb the hits pretty well. And that drive that you talked about, he sparked. Played great and made a really good touchdown catch too, which went to review. I have no idea why that goes to review. Thank heaven for a review in the CFL, I guess, right? How could that not have been called a touchdown right at the beginning? But oh well, they got the call right, I guess, for a change, which is kind of nice. But yeah, he played exceptionally well, and I think he might have a spot there as a slot back, and they'll put somebody else outside. Having Mitch Picton on the team still helps too, right? I know that they would rather not start him, but they know that they can put him in anywhere. So having him in the lineup gives them a little bit of flexibility how they're going to move receivers around.
Mm-hmm. And defensively, overall, I think it was a great game, especially anytime a defense can put points on the board. When the offense, I think there was 7-6 at the half, and then Milligan has that pick 6 for a touchdown. So it sort of sparked the entire team, got the offense going a little bit, obviously got the defense going, but Roland Milligan, again, after missing last week's game, kind of like AJ, finds the end zone.
Yeah, 2 guys who we thought we were worried about during the week. We were watching the practice, weren't we, to see if Ouellette and Milligan had recovered completely from their head hits that they absorbed in the game against Ottawa. So both of them recovered. Both contributed mightily to the Roughriders' victory against Hamilton. So that pick 6 by Milligan, it's his first one, which is kind of funny because he gets so many interceptions and he's such a pivotal player on that football team. That's the one that turned the game around. You're right; it was 7-6 at the half. Really a strange opening half, but that turned it around. And then they get a 2-point convert to throw to Del Duncan Busby, whose only points apparently in the CFL are two-point converts he's caught. But there's another good young receiver, Canadian receiver, who the Roughriders have drafted and put on their roster and is developing pretty nicely. So their passing game is coming along. We got to give kudos to that offensive line too. Only one sack. They got a brand new left tackle starting his first game, a Canadian at left tackle. They're playing 2 American guards, which is unusual, and only one sack that this team has allowed, despite rejiggering that offensive line. 1 sack in 2 games is a pretty impressive stat.
In your years covering the league, have you ever seen 2 American guards and a Canadian left tackle?
Nope.
I haven't been covering it as long as you, but it's always been the Canadian interior and the American tackles. And so sure, you might have a Canadian left tackle once in a while, but you're still going to have your Canadian guards. But for them to have 2 Americans on the inside and 1 Canadian on the outside, I think
you're right. It was always strange when a team went to a Canadian, 2 Americans on the inside. Once in a while there'd be an American center, an American guard. I don't ever remember 2 full-fledged American starting guards. That's the way they figure it's best. Their new offensive lineman, Daniel Johnson, is just a tackle. That's basically all he's played in college, right? So they kept him there, and Tevion Tate can play anywhere, it looks like, and they got Jacob Brammer back. So good guards on the inside, but yeah, it's really rare. The Roughriders can do it if you think that they've got 3 Americans with Jamarcus Hardwick on that offensive line too, remember? So it's a spot where they knew they had to fortify over the last couple of years. And it's easier to find American offensive linemen than it is to find Canadian offensive linemen. So that's why they're stockpiling a little bit, and it's not a bad thing. It's paying off for them. They've got enough good Canadian receivers that they can handle that ratio, and a couple of defensive backs who are Canadians too. And A.J. Allen played pretty well as a Canadian linebacker too. So they know that they can juggle that ratio a little bit and play those 2 American guards who obviously make a difference.
Yeah, and I think Daniel Johnson, I think Mace said he's the most improved player at camp, and he had a really good camp. And I think that it doesn't even come down to ratio along the offensive line for this group. It comes down to the best starting 5, and this is how they want to deploy them. And if there's 2 Americans on the inside, then so be it. A Canadian on the outside, then so be it, right? I think this is the best starting 5 that they could have at this point.
Yeah.
Without some injuries that have happened, obviously.
Yeah, it's not. I don't think it's the way they envisioned it.
No.
Like Logan Furlan can play center. He might be one of the best centers in the league the way he plays it, but I'm sure they wanted him at guard, right? And they wanted an American tackles and Canadian guards. That was the plan, but depending on injuries, how can you dispute what they're doing? And we can't really. We're not trying to, because they've done a really good job of patching that together. It's a very strong offensive line, and no matter who they seem to lose, they're able to replace them. So that speaks highly of the recruiting they've done and of the players who they have acquired.
For sure. We'll see what they do at practice this week leading up to next week's game. The Riders will visit the Toronto Argonauts on Friday. Again, second time in 2 weeks. They're going to go out east for a road matchup, but set to visit the winless Argonauts.
Wild, hey? Reigning Grey Cup champs haven't won a game.
Well, without their quarterback, who didn't also play the Grey Cup game. Was it MVP Nick Arbuckle in the Grey Cup?
Grey
Didn't
Cup
have a good
MVP
game.
Nick Arbuckle, yeah.
Didn't have a great game against Calgary.
Start again. They cut Cameron Dukes in training camp, Toronto did. I couldn't believe that. He was one of those good, young-looking quarterbacks, and I guess Toronto just, they think they know what they're doing, so they've won. It's tough to argue with the amount of Grey Cups they win, but those were cutting Kadeem Carey and cutting Cameron Dukes were strange moves as far as I was concerned, and I don't know, doesn't seem to be paying off making those moves. But we'll see how Saskatchewan used to travel badly out east, but after beating Hamilton and looking better and better, they broke the jinx last year, but I don't think they're scared of playing in Toronto against the Argonauts anymore.
When the Argonauts lost to the Calgary Stampeders on the weekend, Nick Arbuckle, again, 2 interceptions, didn't look great. I would say almost more surprising is that Calgary's 2-0 versus Toronto being 0-2 at this point.
Yeah, we weren't expecting that, were we? So sometimes predictions are crazy. What do you know? Who do you play too, though? Sometimes makes a difference, right? Let's see if when Calgary plays Montreal or Saskatchewan, 2 of the teams who have looked the best so far in the regular season, we'll see if Calgary's really got what it takes to keep up all the way along. But yeah, good for them. They're playing well. Vernon Adams Jr. is playing okay at quarterback for the Stampeders, but I wasn't expecting them to be 2-0. But look at Ottawa. Ottawa loses its quarterback while playing against Saskatchewan. Drew Brown gets hurt and is no good the next game against Montreal. That's a tough schedule for Ottawa to start with. Saskatchewan and Montreal. Ottawa's 0-2, and a lot of people were picking Ottawa to be maybe one of the best teams in the East. So right now, It's what's your schedule. The best teams are still the best teams, but maybe who you're playing against has a lot to do with what your record is at the moment.
Yeah, and I mean, Winnipeg didn't have Zach Collaros to start, and Chris Strevler went out and got them a win at home against the BC Lions, who a lot of people thought were going to take a big step forward this year with Nathan Rourke, but he didn't. He's never looked great in Winnipeg over his career, Rourke, and he certainly didn't look great again last week. And Strevler and the Bombers, who also had a backup running back after Brady Oliveira got hurt, somehow picked up a win there. So, sure, injuries, you can say, we didn't have our starting quarterback, we didn't have our starting running back, but you still got to come out and play.
Yeah, and the Roughriders have been able to replace those guys, which is, that's what good teams are supposed to be able to do. And if you can't, you fall back in the standings. And Toronto can't. We would have thought after Nick Arbuckle's performance last year in the Grey Cup, you thought, okay, they're set. Okay, he's going to be fine, but he hasn't looked very good through the first two games. They do miss Chad Kelly. Maybe the league doesn't, but the Argos certainly do. And the Roughriders, if they're playing against Nick Arbuckle, are going to have an inferior opponent to play against, but that doesn't mean it's a cakewalk. It never is in the CFL.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll see what the injury report out of Toronto is in terms of Kelly and when he comes back. Arbuckle, they have a rookie running back. Mayan Williams had 9 carries, 9 catches last week, so interesting to see how he gets deployed. Anytime a running back can catch the ball that many times, it does, I think, open things up in a zone against a zone defense like Saskatchewan plays. So don't want to call it a trap game at this point, but if they do start Arbuckle, but I think it'll be an interesting matchup, especially for the Riders to go out east twice in a row.
Yeah, different. Yeah. I don't know why they didn't stay. In the old days they would stay out there, and sometimes, but the way they charter now, it's just.
I was going to say to save money, they used to do that, right?
Yeah, true, but it's also not bad. Although maybe you're more comfortable practicing at home too, though. You got all your facilities. Practicing on the road gets to be a little tough, but Western Hockey League teams do it. Bus trips go through the other divisions sometimes, and it helps your bonding. That's not a weakness of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. I think that they get along pretty well, so it's not something that they would be conscious of in their travel plans. But, like you said, they play Saturday in Toronto, Saturday night, board a charter late at night, fly home, get home Sunday, early Sunday morning, rest, don't practice Sunday or Monday. They probably had some meetings, practice Tuesday, Wednesday, and then jump on a plane and go back east again to Hamilton. It doesn't seem like why not just stay out east and rest and have your meetings and find a place to practice. So strange that they're doing that, but to each their own. We'll see if it works, if it's the best way to go about their business.
Yeah, I think with the charters now, it just makes it a whole lot easier to come back home and maybe not go to Niagara Falls for a week or for a couple of days and do some team
fun
bonding
spot to visit, though, Taylor.
Yeah, why not?
Go see the Wax Museum.
Yeah, because sometimes they would stay overnight in wherever they were and then fly out the next morning, and then
the old commercial flying days. When I was flying with the team or following the team around the country, that's what they would do. And me too, jump on commercial flight the next day. Yep.
Yeah. So I'm not surprised that they are coming back home and then heading out back east just a few days later. I don't imagine the travel is going to have, going out east twice in a row is going to have any negative effect on them. Mm-hmm. But you
mentioned the zone defenses. I'm curious, what are you thinking about them? They've given up 413 and 336 passing yards in 2 games. I'm pretty sure that's more than they want to give up. They're impossible to run against, so you're making defense or opposing offenses into one-dimensional offenses. But that's a lot of yards, isn't it?
Well, I think you bring up a good point. They're not letting anything. They're forcing teams to throw, so you're going to give up yards, especially in your soft zone when you force teams to throw the ball.
Yeah.
So I'm not overly concerned. I know Mace is not concerned about giving up that many. Sure, he would like less, but I don't think he's concerned about that many passing yards against. They're getting turnovers occasionally. They're getting big stops when they needed to, right? The defense forced a turnover on downs in week 1, again in week 2, late in the game. So you're getting those big stops when you need it. And until you don't, I think it's not cause for concern at this point. But sure, I mean, you don't want to see 400 yards and 300 and some last week against. But when you're limiting them in the rushing game and when you're forcing some turnovers, I don't think it's that big of an issue.
And that's the way they're set up, right? Is to zone defense, you got to throw a lot against it and a little bit at a time. You don't give up the big plays usually, right? Because you've usually got defensive coverage back there. So to score against the Roughriders, you usually have to complete a lot of passes. And that's why Joshua Bell, their secondary coach, is always thrilled, because it gives them opportunities for turnovers. And Roland Milligan Jr. gets a pick six. Mm-hmm. If they keep intercepting passes, they'll be fine, because that's what it's designed to do, is turn over the football. And the blitzes, when they rarely call a blitz, it's been effective, right? Jameer Thurman, the last 2 games, has turned into huge sacks late in the game from his middle linebacker spot. He's basically untouched, because they go the whole game without blitzing him, and then all of a sudden, late in the game, up he comes through the middle, smacks the quarterback, and the game basically decides the game, because it's such a huge play, and it leaves the other team second and long, third and long, and in really dire straits. So I guess being conservative can help you when you throw in a real radical play once in a while.
Yeah, and I think, again, Jameer Thurman had another great game. He's on his way to an all-star season. But, yeah, Mace isn't going to dial up blitzes in the first half a whole lot. But when it comes down to it, this defense seems to make a play when it matters. And I think that can erase any passing yard problems.
Yep. Yeah, they've done a pretty good job of that. That's the way Corey Mace's defenses have played since he became a defensive coordinator, So he's won a Grey Cup as a defensive coordinator. I know that he keeps talking about maybe turning the role over to Joshua Bell, but at the way things are going right now, last year I would have suggested it's a good idea. This year, not so much. Corey Mace seems to have a real good handle on things that are going on field and in terms of calling his defense. So things are going okay, and I think they can just maintain the status quo for a little while longer.
Well, so far so good for the Riders. They will visit the Toronto Argonauts on Friday, and we will discuss it next week in the Rider Rumblings podcast. Darrell, thanks as always for joining.
You're welcome, Taylor. See you soon.